Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Jar Academy podcast. My name is Timmy Gosling. If we haven't met before, I'm so excited for many reasons this morning, mainly because this episode is a banger. I have been so excited to film this one. I wanted to film it when I was in Bali, but if you watch the previous episodes, I was so freaking uncomfortable in that studio. It just felt like so much pressure, where I like being here. I feel like my personality comes back. So yeah, I am also excited to be back in this space and feel like myself again while making this episode. Now, I want to change a couple of things with the delivery of this podcast just quickly. A little housekeeping before we dive in. Number one, moving forward, I want to start to include some facts that are going to help you guys. For those that do not know, a holistic counselor is not someone that just looks at the emotional cognitive side of things. I also include parts of neurobiology. I include how the brain works, how the nervous system impacts this, all of these different aspects that also go into shaping and creating the way we react, why we might be missing parts, etc. And this is super important when it comes to anyone who is teaching or working with attachment styles, because we know so much from growing up the way that our different attachment styles not just impact our behavior and the way that we relate in our relationships, but it also affects the way the brain develops, okay? I want to start off with giving you guys a little fact, and these facts are not going to be random. They're going to be something to do with relationships or something to do with emotional regulation that is going to help you in your relationships, okay? Because some of these things are not whole podcast episodes on their own. I know that if I put them up on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, they're not going to do very well, but I want you guys to know them. So for today's quick fact, before we dive into this banger of an episode, is about emotional regulation. So when you become dysregulated or triggered in your relationship, often a lot of counselors, somatic practitioners, everything will teach you, once you become triggered, to start to regulate the nervous system. So move into your body, breathe through it, go for a walk, go for a meditation, whatever that might be. Now, I want to explain this to you. When you become activated, there's three main parts of the brain. There's the prefrontal cortex, there's the hippocampus, and there's the amygdala. When we become emotionally flooded enough, let's say in an argument, our prefrontal cortex goes offline. It just goes, see ya. And that prefrontal cortex is everything that is kind of our rational reasoning, if you will. And that's why it can be hard to see logic and you just get flooded with the emotion. But as you start to regulate, this prefrontal cortex comes back online. And the reason that I'm telling you guys this is because this is where I see so many people get stuck, because they take space in their arguments to go and calm themselves down. But ultimately, once they start to come back online, they're not conscious of their thought patterns, and they start to ruminate on the problem. They start to bring up other stuff to themselves, maybe not even to their partner, and they continue the activation, and they continue to keep themselves in this state and kind of want their partner to fix it, but they're not really helping themselves. So it's really, really important that when you are activated or you're emotionally flooded and you're trying to take time to calm down, you are not just working on your body-based principles, because if you do all the breath work, all the walks, everything, but you ruminate on what a fucking asshole they were, then all you're going to do is continue to activate yourself, and you're basically giving a feedback to the other parts of your brain, like the danger is still here, it hasn't gone away, and it's just going to take a lot longer to get anywhere positive. So that's our little fact for today. On today's episode, we are talking about having high standards. Now, having high standards is very misconstrued, because even that sentence, when I say it, can activate some people because they think people's standards are too high, etc. Now, what I want to explain with this is there's a very big difference between what some people think high standards are and what high standards actually are. And I'm going to teach you what they actually are. Often, when we get into dating in particular, we know our worth, and we might have done some of the inner work, and we kind of want this person to treat us a certain way. But where it gets tricky is when it is coming from a genuine self-knowing, and when it is coming from a protective part or a fearful part. For example, if I am berating someone on how they need to treat me or how they should treat me, or I'm not going to stand for that and don't do that, that attitude and that anger and that animosity and me fighting from it actually isn't coming from a genuine place of self-knowing and self-worth. It's coming from a part of me coming in to protect because I don't want them to treat me that way. And while it's a yucky energy to be around, it's also very exhausting for you because you are constantly having to fight and be in this stress response and prove your point and demand to be treated this way, rather than being in a place of groundedness and integrity and seeing their behavior and setting appropriate boundaries where you need to, and discussing your emotions when you need to, and explaining how things hurt you when you mean to, being open to repair, but also understanding when it gets to a certain point that actually this isn't aligning with me and I'm okay to walk away from that. So quickly, what do we think high standards are? We often think it's perfectionism. We think it's that we're needing to be perceived a certain way, expecting luxury treatment early on. Generally, people like to get a coffee and they like to see like if there's a match first, and before they go into treating you with princess treatment or treating you in this really high regard, like there needs to be a genuine slow build of connection. And this is where it kind of falls into like that love bombing, because if it's this luxury treatment and all this stuff at the start and there's no groundwork into building a solid relationship or understanding of each other, that's where it can get a bit scary. Assuming that they should know what you need without you having to say it, okay? Everyone understands that everyone has different needs to each other. So how you loved your ex-partner is going to be very different to how you love this new person, because this new person might need more space. This new person might want to, you to be there a lot for them. So you don't know. And it takes time to figure that out. And that goes both ways. So when we are experiencing things at the start, it's also really important that we are not from a place of demanding, but also sharing with them how we like to be loved, cared for, and supported. When we're coming from this place, it's really difficult because this isn't rooted in reality, and it's not coming from genuine connection and wanting to build something. It's coming from fantasy and fear. So what are real high standards? Real high standards come from internal alignment. It basically means I know who I am. I know what I am not. I know my faults. I know my flaws. I know my values. I know what I bring. I know what I don't bring. I know where I need to work on. I know where I am doing really well on, and all these different areas, so that I am aligned in who I am and what I am, and I know that that's coming off in an authentic way, and I deserve someone that matches and meets that energy, and I don't have to force anyone to see that, because I know that I am enough regardless of how this person decides to treat me, because that is on them. It comes from self-worth, clarity, and emotional regulation and awareness. So it's really less about forcing people to see you a particular way, and it more comes from a place of choosing how you show up, what you accept, how long you're willing to wait for a love that feels safe, secure, and reciprocal. Again, when it comes to what we will accept, there is a way to not accept behavior in a way that is loving and open, and there is a way to not accept behavior that is berating and belittling. Particularly if you're someone who is working through a lot right now with your relationships, and maybe you just feel like you're absolutely freaking struggling and you're like, how do I get to this point? Don't worry, I am going to give you guys a whole list I have created at the end of this that is going to help you guys make really tangible changes today to start to move in a more positive direction. So this all sounds rude. Thank you. This all sounds amazing, but what does it actually look like in real life? It comes from offering emotional safety and expecting it in return, because it's a two-way street, right? Particularly in early dating, it's asserting our boundaries in a way with clarity and not control. And if you are someone who kind of struggles with boundaries, or you don't know what that looks like, a really common example is around consistency at the start of dating. And if you say it in a way that it comes from control, it might sound like, I need you to message me every day, otherwise I don't think you're serious about me. Or if you were serious about me, you would be constantly texting me. Versus, I really value consistency when I'm getting to know someone. It helps me feel really connected and safe as the relationship is growing. What does communication usually look like for you? So that way you're kind of naming the need, but it's a two-way street, right? Now I'm not saying like you have to text me every day or you're not treating me good enough, and I'm already kind of making them feel like they're on the back foot. I'm explaining what my expectations are in a healthy way, but it's also a two-way communication street where then we can understand a little bit more about each other, because maybe they might say, I'm a, twice a day texter, or I don't really like to text, I like to call, or whatever that might be. And then you're not kind of playing mind games in your own mind, filling in blanks and making assumptions that aren't even real. Anyway, back to what it looks like in real life. Sorry, I really needed to digress on that one, because that is like a key one people get really stuck on, because I think a lot of the time when we haven't grown up knowing what healthy boundaries look like, we think that they have to be really harsh. So number 3 is walking away from inconsistency, not as a punishment, but as a way to protect your own peace and to know that that's not aligned with what you're wanting, particularly if it's something that you've communicated to them. So that doesn't mean slamming the door in the face as you leave, but noticing the pattern of behavior over time and going, actually, how is this making me feel? I'm listening to their words, but their behavior is showing me something else, and that doesn't super feel great for me. I don't really want to spend all my time explaining to someone how to treat me or fighting for some level of consistency that I would value in my relationship. The next one is holding our own triggers and not expecting our partners to do majority of the heavy lifting for us. It's very natural and normal to maybe want to express it, but first of all, you're taking time for you to process and work through that and regulate through it before kind of coming back to the dynamic with it and expecting them just to fix it for you. Now, one of the biggest things that really underlines everything that I'm talking about, and it's the biggest thing I see people that move into really healthy relationships have, and it's a really good sense of self-trust and really embodying that self-trust. They know their needs, they've worked on their wounds, they understand the values that they're looking for and what would be best aligned to them, and they're willing to wait for a connection that meets them in that depth rather than a fantasy. It's not about demanding more, but it's trusting that you don't have to force something or force someone to be what you want them to be. Because healthy relationships aren't meant to be about force, right? They're meant to be about emotional safety and feeling safe in the relationship and the dynamic. The biggest piece of advice I could probably give with this is to really understand and look at patterns of behavior, because people can talk all they want, right? They can talk. I'm going to do this and I'm going to get you that and I'm going to be here and I'm going to marry, and they don't do it. So look at patterns of behavior. And when it comes to patterns of behavior, if they're doing something that is upsetting you, check in with yourself first. Is this something that is familiar, as in it might be a trigger of mine? Or is this something that, like, yes, my feelings are valid here, and my reaction to that is also proportionate to the situation? Have a conversation with them about it and explain and teach them, remember, because they're not expected to know, like, what being with you looks like and how support looks like in a dynamic with you, and what you're looking for. And then if that doesn't continue and it's a repeated pattern of behavior, then believe the behavior. And when you believe the behavior, it doesn't have to be a smoke show and it doesn't have to be like an aggressive thing, but it's actually going, okay, like, I've done all the things I needed to do now. This doesn't feel great. This is not how my future husband or wife would treat me. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to step away from this dynamic. And that comes from not like this burst of visceral reactive energy. It might take a second to get there, but it really comes from like a deep knowing in your chest of being like, you know what? Like, I've done too much work. I've been with too many fuckwits to want to keep doing this. This isn't right. And even though that sounds insane, if you are someone who has a lot of limiting beliefs at this point about being like, I am never going to meet my person, trust me, the quicker you do this, the quicker you will meet them. Not because you're demanding it, not because you're forcing it, not because you're having these high expectations of how you're going to get all these amazing gifts and it's going to be incredible, but because you know your own faults and wounds, you know what you bring to the table, you know where your weak points are, you know where you're working on, and you want them to be able to do the same. Because as much as we speak about wanting people to be there for our triggers and our moments and have open and understanding, we also need to do them that for them as well, right? That's what makes emotional safety. Anyway, that's enough of the ramble. Hopefully now I've given you somewhat of a clear distinction and haven't just chewed your ears off. But let's talk about the tangible tools. The first one is self-knowing. This is a big one because this is a huge highlight that I just yapped about, but we need to actually pull that apart for a second. Self-knowing. Knowing what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are in relationships, what you need to work on, where you tend to fall into more dysfunctional patterns, where you've done a lot of work. This isn't about pulling yourself apart and like looking at all the things that are still wrong with you, okay? This takes really like strong self-awareness, and it's not about being criticizing yourself, but it's about being critical, okay? Because I know, for example, right, that I have done so much work on my attachment style that it is out of this world. I used to be extremely anxious, and then once I healed that, I realized I was confusing closeness with proximity, and I didn't know how to genuinely co-regulate, and I became very avoidant. And then I worked through being very avoidant, and I know deep in my heart so deeply that I have an incredible ability to sit with myself in the mud and process myself and come back with a healthier resolution. I also know that one of my faults is that I do get emotionally flooded probably more than what other people do in the heat of the moment, and that it does take me a little bit more time, and I have to explain very calmly that I need time away to understand how I feel, because that link for me isn't as strong as maybe is what it would be for other people, because it wasn't something I was taught in childhood. So I can be dating someone and they can say to me like, you're very anxious, and I'm like, that is such a projection, and I can say that wholeheartedly with my full chest, because I know that that's not true. Understand what I'm saying? So it's not about tearing yourself apart and looking at everything and being like, oh my God, look at me, I'm a giant piece of shit. It's about being like, actually, here's my strengths and weaknesses. Here's what I value. Here's what I want. Here's where I'm a fun human being. Here's what I bring to the table. Here's my strengths. And I know that I come off very domineering when I am doing a podcast or like talking about relationships, because I get very passionate. But I also know that I'm the biggest softy baby princess girl ever in my relationship. So we're going to unpack all of that, okay? You're going to take a moment to really figure that out and be very self-compassionate and very clear on understanding those values and things about yourself. But there's also a point where you need to continue that long term, because self-knowing isn't just about knowing all the work you've done. It's also about knowing how certain things feel. So constantly trying to journal, do kind of somatic tracking. For those that don't know what somatic tracking is, it's like checking in with yourself, like, okay, I'm angry, where do I feel the anger, like really getting used to connecting to the sensations in your body. Because as much as that sounds woo-woo and crazy, the insula, the part of the brain that is responsible for feeling into our bodily sensations, gets stronger the more we use it. And not only does that help with like hunger cues or needing to go to the bathroom or when we feel anxiety, but it also helps us be like, oh, actually, that just feels like it crossed the boundary. So you're going to get a lot more knowing and not being so reliant on trying to cognitively understand everything and pull it apart and do pros and cons lists, okay? It's not just helpful with relationships, it's helpful for fucking everything. Now that we've jumped into neurobiology as well, the second thing is emotional or nervous system regulation. When you can work on regulating your emotions and your nervous system, even when it's the tiny little shit on a day-to-day basis, like you get dysregulated and you're like, okay, you know what? I'm going to take 2 minutes to do a breath work. I'm going to take this afternoon to go to yoga. I'm going to just allow myself to feel that feeling or feel that emotion. All the little parts of you that maybe in the past that were hurt and, you know, not seen or were told their feelings were too much are going to kind of like get on board with you to trust yourself that like it doesn't matter what someone else does, because I am here to turn up for myself. And that creates a really strong self-trust that no one can shake or ever take away from you. And as much as like we like to think that it's the big grandiose things that make the biggest impact, I genuinely find for people who are wanting to have a little bit more self-love and care when it comes to dating, it really comes down to building a strong connection of self-trust with yourself. It's phenomenal what it will do for you. Our next one is our core beliefs. Because if we believe that every man is not going to do, I'm only using men as an example because this seems to be a popular one sometimes, but if we believe like all men treat people like shit, and I'm going into that relationship or that dynamic and I'm meeting that person, what am I going to be? I'm going to be freaking hyper vigilant as shit that they're going to treat me like shit. So what am I going to do? I'm going to demand more. I'm going to, want to get in front of it, being like, you have to treat me like this. Like, because it's already coming from a place where I think that you're going to fail me, and I'm not being open-minded to allowing you to show me who you are and me making the assessment on whether or not that's good for me. So ask yourself, like, what do I believe about love? Where does it come from? And really honor those parts of yourself that might be needing a little bit more love, and also try and cognitively rewire this. So when you start seeing yourself falling into these thought patterns, being like, I acknowledge how I feel right now, but this does not mean X. And the more you kind of say that to yourself, the more you start to rewire those beliefs, okay? It takes time, but it works. Next one is build a full life. Because if you can come into the dynamic and you are like, I know, like for me, for example, when I got into the point of dating the last time before I met my current partner, I made it my biggest thing that I wanted to like eat from the smorgasbord or the buffet of life. And I went and learned how to surf. I went and learned how to skate. I went and did freediving. I went and did all of these activities and all of these things. And I was so open-minded to being like, I'm going to try so many different hobbies. I took up puzzling, okay? I did puzzles, but like all these different things that made me be like, you know what, like I would like to take myself for a beer. And not because I'm egoic, but because it was like, I feel like I wouldn't sit there and just like talk about other people or talk about, gossip magazines. And not that there's anything wrong with that if that's your jam, but like I could come with some substance, and I knew that I had an interesting life, and I knew that anyone would be lucky to be a part of that. And that wasn't saying that was easily shaken, because I was traveling all the time. I was up to so much adventure. Like I thought, I have such a wonderful, fulfilling life that I love, and I know someone else is going to come in and love it equally. And it did happen. My poor partner now has constant holidays, and it stresses him out, I think. But anyway, the next one is self-compassion, because really what that part of you that is doing that and is baiting that and is screaming like, I want to be treated like this, treat me like this, has developed because you weren't treated like that. And it has now come forward because it wants to establish boundaries and protect yourself, but it's just doing it in a way that seems beneficial, but it's not beneficial to them or you. And that needs honoring, and that needs self-compassion, and that needs to be worked through, because there's some grief behind that. There's a heavy heart. And I think it's really important that it's not just when that self-protective layer comes out that we're like, no, go away. But we're also really taking conscious time to maybe go journal or process that and acknowledge that part of us and thank it for what it's done, and thank it for that it wants to protect us, and reassure it that we're now here to take the lead, okay? The last one is real life integration. Because we can acknowledge the part, we can understand who we are, we can do all of the things, but there's only so much self-work with anything in relationships. Anything in relationships, there's only so much we can do on our own. Where the change happens, or the rewiring happens, or the behavior change happens, is when it happens in the moment. So when you feel yourself going like, no, I want to da-da-da and demand and come from this yucky place to be heard and seen and validated, to go, okay, like, yeah, that's my protected part. Hey, thank you. I don't need that. I need to take some time. I need to go back and look at what's happening, and I need to sit with this and go, oh, how is this actually aligning with my goals, values, dreams, aspirations in a relationship, and make decisions from there that are best aligned with you, whether that's through a conversation, whether that's trying to explain to them, or whether that's walking away if it's repeated enough. So integration is key, and integration sometimes means that we're going to get it freaking wrong, okay? That's not saying to beat yourself up for, that's not saying to listen to this podcast episode and go, I got it, because you do got it now. You've got the awareness of it now, and the fact you're listening to this shows me that you have insane self-awareness, because you're willing to want to change it, and you're willing to want to come from a really embodied place. But you've also got to teach the body like it's a child, right? Because it doesn't speak English. It speaks nervous system, and it speaks actions, and it speaks sensations. So we want to teach it through its own way, that we are now safe and we can handle this a different way. This journey is a crazy one, and I like it, but I don't like it. When I say I like it, use it as inspiration, because obviously it's something that I had to go through and deal with, and everyone does at some point of their relationship journey, because you kind of allowed whatever to happen, and now this protector part has come forward and you're wanting better for yourself, but you just don't know how to deliver that yet. So you're not broken, you're not, there's nothing wrong with you, you're just learning, babe. Okay, we want you to hold this with softness and kindness in your heart. Anyway, my loves, woo, I loved that episode. Next week we have next week? What is it, Friday? Yeah, next week at this point. We have another really exciting one coming up. It is all about, is it them or is it me? And it really helps you learn to distinguish the difference. You know, when you get triggered and you're like, I don't know, you kind of think like, is it me? Is it them? Is it a trigger? Is it a da-da-da? Anyway, we're going to break it all down. Thank you, my loves. Have an amazing weekend.